So this is the second part. Doesn't matter if you missed the first part. The first part is up on the YouTube channel, of looking at some of the power and conflict poems in an attempt to push ourselves onwards into that more perceptive interpretation. Just to recap, what I was talking about last week was the fact that people, as a marker of this, you've seen hundreds and hundreds of them, people have a tendency with this question, with this idea, to literally go into kind of listing of quotations and then just talking about them, rather than really answering the question. And so you can already distinguish yourself quite a lot by focusing on an answer to the question. And what we're trying to do is think, how can you take that a little bit more perceptively? Now, I've talked a lot before to people I've taught about my approach, or the approach that I kind of install. And I know a few other teachers do as well, where when you set up your argument at the beginning, your first initial answer in response to the question, we talk about a something but something idea, where you give your initial response, and then you go a little bit deeper. You go into something that maybe is a bit more tentative, a bit more unclear. And that's where you get that perceptive, the possibility of that perceptive response. The way that the marking works, you see, is basically a ladder, but a one-way ladder. When you write your power and conflict response this in a few weeks' time, at the beginning, you're at the bottom of the ladder. All of you are. 0 points, that's it. Then the ladder has the different levels that you can achieve on, called 6 levels in terms of literature. What you do is, as you achieve the marks for the particular assessment objectives, you climb the ladder. First, we see level 1, then we see level 2, then we see level 3. For the majority of you in here, we won't even look really at 1 and 2. You'll jump to level 3 pretty quickly. But then you show the skills that move you up. Now, it's a one-way ladder, because once you've shown those skills, you can't go down. And so what often happens is that in that first response, the something before the but, you're going to move yourself up to level 4, or maybe even getting into some level 5s at that point. Secure yourself a good, strong mark. And then you move into the more tentative idea. And that's where you can potentially push further and continue climbing the ladder up towards a level 6. So that's what we're trying to work at here today. Now, I'm going to focus in on 5 of the poems. I did the first half up to Storm on the Island last week. I'm now going to do the second half. I'm not going to deal with either War Photographer or Tissue or Checking Out My History. I'm just going to deal with these 5 as ones that you can use. Now, again, to catch up on what I said last week, I refer to these quite often as primary and secondary poems. Primary poems are the ones that are going to be printed on, is the one that's printed on the page, the one you have to write about. The secondary poems are the one you choose to write about. Obviously, you need to know them differently. Primary poem, you have a copy of it in front of you. Secondary poem, you need to know all the things to bring it in with you. And all of these are potential secondary poems, okay? Some of them are potential primary poems as well. Poppy's The Emigre and Kamikaze could well come up as a primary poem there. I don't think Bayonet Charge will. It came up last year and it's come up twice. I don't think Remains will. It came up about 3 years ago, so not that long ago. Won't say definitely, but I'm pretty sure not. So there's a lot to be gained from these 5 poems here. Again, the risk of repeating myself from last week, I'm not going to try and give you a full reading of all of the poems all the way through. Your teachers have done that with you. I'm just going to focus in on small areas which may be able to push you a little bit further. So I'm going to start with Bayonet Charge. And I'm going to focus entirely on the second stanza of Bayonet Charge. Now, if you're bringing Bayonet Charge in, and that will be what you'll be doing if you're writing about it, and I think it's a very good one to use as well. It not only deals with power and conflict very well, it deals with emotions very effectively. and it has that level of challenge that can move on. This second stanza is the strange part. Okay, this is the bit that people will generally not talk about. You know, when you think about the easy things to talk about in here, it's some of that imagery in the first stanza of the rifle numbers are smashed down, the patriotic tear, all of that. It's about the yellow hair. It's about the things that appear to be luxuries, like human dignity becoming a luxury. But this second stanza, very, very strange. What's it about, and how does it really affect what we're trying to say and what the meaning of the poem overall? Well, first of all, let's start here with the emotion being identified. We've had fear in the first stanza. We get terror in the third. But in between here, he becomes bewildered, completely lost in who he is. And he almost stops. He doesn't stop, of course, but he almost stops because he suddenly becomes bewildered. It's a complete change from where we are before. And it moves into this question that clearly he asks himself. In what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? A very strange phrase, not very clear in what he's talking about at all. What I think we need to look at here is that he appears to be being incredibly philosophical. He's bewildered. He's stopped almost in his running, thinking, what's actually going on around me? Inside all the fear and outside all the terror, what's actually going on around me here? He refers to the idea of the clockwork of the stars and nations, the way that the stars just move around. Of course, they don't move, we move, but it appears they move in the sky just regularly in clockwork, round like that. The way that the nations interact like clockwork around, particularly in terms of war and things like that. Remember clockwork, you wind it up, you let it go, and it just keeps going regularly like that, no interference from you. Now, if that's how the world is working, and it's cold, it's unfeeling, and it doesn't care about your existence. And what's his role? Within the clockwork, he is the hand. What hand is he at this particular point in the clock? What hand is he? What's he pointing at that second? Is he the second hand? Is he just something unimportant? What's his role? Where is he pointing in the cold clockwork of nations? Why is he there? Now, that's what I think it's going towards. And that idea of the world as clockwork going on is the main thing you can pull out of this, I think. Cold clockwork. At this stage, when he's terrified, when around him everything seems chaos. Cold clockwork. Now, moving further down, he then comes to a probably even stranger in the way it's written. He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs, listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running, and his foot hung like statue in mid-stride. Running, runs, running, jumped, listening. It's a complete mismatch, isn't it? Of words and phrases that don't seem to come across and mean anything. I suppose this idea of if you jump up in the dark, and why would you jump up in the dark? Fear, I suppose. And you're running, and you don't know why you're running. Not that this is a particular thing that happens to an awful lot of us. I don't think we jump up in the dark and run along and think, why am I running? But I suppose we can imagine it. And you listen between the footfalls, so in the silence between the footfalls, to see if you can hear, why am I running? What am I running from? That's what it seems to be going along to. What's important then? What can we take from this? It's in the dark. I mean, he's not literally in the dark, is he? But is he in the dark? He's jumped up in the dark. He has no understanding of what's around him. He's completely oblivious to what's going on. He doesn't understand the reason that he's running. It's the mystery of the middle. Now, you can see why this works with the meaning of Bayonet Charge overall. It's easy to talk about the fear and the terror. But when somebody in the middle is sitting there trying to actually understand why they're here in the first place, and particularly with something like the First World War, where he's running at apparently a hedge that seems to be shooting at him on his own, right? With a rifle that doesn't actually seem to matter or work as far as he's concerned. Then I suppose you can understand why someone would be searching for these reasons. And that final bit there about his foot hanging like a statue, I suppose, in mid-stride, as though time has stopped for him, gives us that sense of philosophy in the middle of it. Now, last thing to notice on this then, if you want to get the sense and the importance of this, notice the number of lines here. The first stanza and the second stanza have both got 8 lines, a quite regular stanza, an octet or octave. Poetry, remember, likes to be mathematical. It likes to have divisive line easily dividing lines between it so they can pair up. But a 7, prime number, middle number, why is it shorter than the rest of them? Well, for the same reason, it's actually really only 6.5, because in the middle of it, his thoughts, his pondering, his philosophy, his attempt to work out why he's there is cut short by this hair. It comes in the middle of this. Then the shot slashed furrows threw up a yellow hair. Even these ponderings are interrupted by the reality and the horror of what's going on around him. Okay? So, still a very, very strange, relatively confusing stanza. But I think what we can do is use it as an example of the way that the mysteries of war, the mysteries of why things like this are happening, why individuals end up in this situation is there. And even underlying it is potentially the sense of somebody above forcing them into this situation. Okay. Maybe slightly less challenging. Remains. Everyone loves Remains. What a happy poem. What could we say to go with Remains? Last week I pointed out to you, in an awful lot of cases, I talk about the ending of poems. But the ending of this poem, I think everyone understands. I mean, the ending is actually the second half. Notice the bit where his mate tosses guts back into his body and the man's carted off in the back of a lorry is pretty much exactly halfway through the poem. It's the end of 4 stanzas. There's 4 stanzas to go. So when he says end of story, except not really, it's actually the middle of the story. But you all know about that, and you all know about the trauma afterwards. One little tip for you. When if you're talking about his trauma, try not to dismiss it as PTSD. Okay? We've had, again, I've marked on Remains a lot of times before, and people keep going on about that. And when you just give it a label, you're not really saying anything. Just talk about his trauma. Talk about the difficulty of, the fact that the trauma remains afterwards. I mean, the whole point with Remains is, isn't it, that at the time it happens, he's kind of like less bothered about it than afterwards. The impact of memory is far more than the event itself. Something that happens with War Photographer as well. What I wanted to focus you in on, though, is a part of that second half. Now, But I Blink, remember, is the end of a stanza. And it does exactly the same job here as the yellow hair did just now. It interrupts. As though at this particular moment, he can't control it. When he's home on leave, but I blink. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink. He can't stop it. Just a blink. How long can you go without blinking? He blinks, and every time he blinks, this happens. He sleeps, and this happens. He dreams, and this happens. It's about these 3 words: blink, sleep, dream. All to do with eyes closing and increasing in intensity. Blinking, bang. Sleeping, losing consciousness. Dreaming, accessing the subconscious. And as you see, as he does those, they get worse. When he blinks, he sees a bit that we haven't seen already, the guy bursting through the doors of the bank as he comes out. When he sleeps, we get back to that moral dilemma that's at the heart of the whole thing. The guy is probably armed, but possibly not. That thing, I've certainly discussed it with my class, and I'm sure you have before, that underpinning idea of what could you do in this situation? If it was possibly armed, probably not, it'd be a very different poem. Because then you think to yourself, well, perhaps he shouldn't have shot it. But if a guy's running towards you with people around and he probably is armed, then you could argue that a soldier has a duty to do something about it. And I think it's important that we don't just see what he does as completely wrong. So that moral dilemma comes back when we go to sleep. But when he goes as far as dreaming, that's when he sees the horror of what's going on. Blinking, interrupting then, as though it's a blink, interrupting what he's thinking about. Blink, sleep, dream. Levels of unconsciousness. The deeper he goes away from the surface and away from consciousness, the worse the problem gets. And that's the way his trauma is. Okay? He cannot escape it, even in those things that should allow you to escape it. Unconsciousness, sleep. Okay? Now, poppies, I said to you before, I said at the beginning, is a very strong possibility for one you might have to write about as the primary poem. I know my colours to the Marty. I don't think Poppies is a very good poem myself. I think it's a bit all over the place. It's not one of my favourites, but it's there and it may come up and we have to write about it. And so what can we write about to make it more interesting? Okay, certainly not Jesus. Any of you who've been given that? Right. First of all, this section. Okay. This section here, when she sent him off. Okay, what about this? The fact is, what she describes here, and she comes to it elsewhere, she describes losing him as a child, her desire for him to be a child again. What does she want to do? She wants to play Eskimos with him like when he was little. Why? Why would you want to do that? Because I suppose your little boy is under your control and isn't going to go off to war. Maybe. Her impulse is to run her fingers through his hair. Right? Again, not something I would imagine you'd be particularly chuffed about your mum doing right now, but probably didn't bother you when you were young. Right? Childish. She wants to see him as a child, doesn't she? And therefore, we have the argument, which can come across this, is her loss, poem about loss as we know, did her loss happen a long time ago? Yeah, she loses him from this world. Yeah, she loses him from her house when she walks out that door. But is the biggest loss the loss of him as a child? Because as a mother, that's when she has the most impact, the most influence, the strongest ability to push her love and use her love positively. Well, it seems backed up later on in lines 23 to 24 with these lines. When he's gone, after he goes, it says, I went into your bedroom and released a songbird from its cage. Now, it's obviously very, very highly metaphorical. Okay. One of the reasons I don't necessarily think much of this as a poem up until this point, it hasn't been particularly metaphorical, and suddenly it goes completely abstract. With a following line about a single dove from a pear tree, which apparently appears to be him dying. It's just too obscure, really. But anyway, but let's think, what's she doing? He's left, so she goes to his bedroom. Again, a bedroom in their room. Is it a symbol once again of that idea of the mother and the child thing, his own room, his own sanctum, his own place that she goes up to? Is that why she goes there straight away? And what happens when she releases a songbird from its cage? Well, come on, she doesn't really release a songbird from its cage, does she? She doesn't walk up to his bedroom and he happens to have a songbird and she thinks, oh, I better let it go free now. Open the door, out you go, off you go. No, surely it's purely metaphorical, right? Why do you release a bird from its cage? Let it be free. Birds are free, generally. Most literature, that's what we see. Birds are a symbol of freedom. And when you cage a bird, you are taking something that is free and you are caging it for your own purposes, your own pleasure. Is that what a mother does? A bit harsh on a mother, really, isn't it? But can you see it that way? Why a songbird? What does a songbird do? It just sings, it entertains, it's just for people's pleasure. Caging up a songbird is a bit of a selfish act, really, isn't it? Is that what's going on here? Is she finally releasing that pent-up child that she has inside, that child that she's wanted to keep all a part of it there, that control that she has? Is that what's going on here? Is it an acceptance? Again, symbolism of that moment can take you a bit further. And finally on poppies, just bringing you back to this idea of treating him as a child, the very fact that this is the end, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. Her final thing in this, assuming that we take that he is dead, that he has died. The dove comes past, she listens out. What does she want? She doesn't want to hear him. She doesn't want to hear him come back. She wants to hear him as a child, a playground voice. She wants that child back again, even at the end. So there's a way of taking that idea of perception a bit further. Just hinting, having looked at her loss, going further and suggesting that maybe the loss, if that's what we're talking about, is to do with something a little bit deeper as a mother. Okay, just a couple more to go. The emigre is one that I know bothers a lot of people, but it's exactly the kind of poem that they are likely to use, because there is what I think is what I think when I'm always thinking about what they're likely to come up and print and use is that they've got to think about the idea that grade this is for an exam for grades 1 to 9. So they've got to allow grade 1s to access it. They've got to allow grade 9s to access it. This is why I will be very surprised if they ever use tissue, because I don't really think grade 1s are going to access what tissue's about, because let's face it, I don't even know what tissue's about. I don't even think she knows what tissue's about. I don't think tissue's about anything. Just a collection of words. You should try and look clever. But anyway, the emigre is one of those ones where you can get it at a more basic level, and there's much more depth to it. So it's the kind of one I can see them using. So where do we go with it? Well, the first thing, which I think you can get at a relatively straightforward level, but at the same time can actually push your ideas quite a bit further forward, is this sense that all the way through she is discussing or getting across the idea that memory or your own head, your own imagination is far more powerful than reality. That to me is very much what the poem is about to a degree, because over the course of the poem, that's what she argues. She argues that the picture of her country, of her child that's in her head, a place that she hasn't been since she was a child, will last and will be there far longer than these people who have now created a hellhole in there instead. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's an awful lot of ideas where there's pairings put together of this. The first one, in the first stanza, she refers to the place as possibly being sick with tyrants. Sick with tyrants. Yeah, I can imagine tyrants being in charge of country being definitely like a sickness. Okay. But the thing with sickness is, in most cases, you get better. So if the country's sick with tyrants, it'll recover at some point. But not her. Her image is branded. You know what branding is? Permanent kind of labeling of something. You can't get rid of it if you try. And it's interesting to notice that all of these positive ones about her memory aren't choices. They are things that she cannot escape from. She hasn't branded herself. She's been branded by it. By something positive, an impression of sunlight. But while the tyrants, the sickness of the country might get better, her branding, the branding of the positive, of the sunlight, will remain, whatever goes on. Her city is more powerful than the reality. In the next stanza, she gives this picture of her city as idealized, white streets, graceful slopes, glowing, all of that. But the point here for me is time rolls its tanks and the frontiers rise. She's using imagery there, isn't she, of war and conflict, of tanks, impenetrable, as far as you go, impenetrable weapons, frontiers, created barriers. But the idea, of course, is time rolls its tanks by. Well, tanks will keep going and they'll roll past. The frontiers rise, well, I suppose they can come down. What's she saying? Well, her view, her city, when that happens, glows even clearer. So we've moved on from just the permanence of her impression. We're now going to the idea that actually her view strengthens as they try and be more violent, as they try and be more aggressive, more possessive. It just makes it glow even clearer. And then she goes to this idea, whether it's close like waves or close like waves, I think you can take either. But think about waves. What do waves do? Yeah, they go in, but they come back out again. They go in, but they come back out. So, if frontiers close like waves, that's what they do. If you're taking it that all of this glows even clearer and close like waves, it's like waves. Again, you could talk about the natural thing washing over it. But what it is like over here, it's something that's unstoppable. These aren't. Okay? Her view, the glowing of it is unstoppable. Then she goes into language, and language is clearly attached to identity in her eyes here. The fact that her language is a child's language. The fact that she can't really speak it very well anyway, it doesn't really matter. It's got no practical use for her. It still comes, and notice once again the sense that she doesn't intend it to. She spills a grammar. But in this bit here, again, we've got their view of it. They call it a lie. The state bans it. You can imagine this. You've heard of this in countries that have these situations before. Take an ethnic group, ban its language to try and push it down. But it's contrasted with the fact that she can't get it off her tongue. You can ban what you like. You can call it a lie, what you like, but it doesn't stop it. She can't get the language off her tongue. Like branding, like the waves, she can't. This is something that's not a choice. It's unstoppable. Her city is more powerful than any reality can be. Her view is far more powerful and it can't be stopped. It's not just her choice. You cannot get rid of somebody's identity through those ways. Now, the second part to go for again is the ending here. The émigré final stanza is another one of those, like the second stanza in Bayonet Charge, which is so abstract, it's bizarre. It's often very difficult to keep hold of, but I think many of you probably will be able to. You know, it starts with a very clear statement that she has no passport, therefore she cannot go back to the country. So this doesn't really happen. Of course, it's a dream, a vision, an imagination. She can't go back. She has no passport. It's finished there. What do we get instead? We get a bunch of positive things. Her city gets described. It comes in a white plane. Oh. So it flies to her in something beautiful and pure and wonderful. That's what it's like. We get this description of it like some kind of pet or child, lying down, being stroked with its shining eyes. That's what her image is to her, like some kind of comforting pet or part of her. When she goes on this imaginary visit back to what the city is now, she distinguishes her city from the city of walls, again, barriers up around. And her city takes her dancing, an expression of freedom, through the city of walls, a symbol of, constriction. She can dance freely. Meanwhile, we have this repetition of they, these faceless people. And what do? Verbs. They accuse, they circle her, they mutter, these kind of dangerous things, like faceless people moving around her, while she has the ideas here. And do notice as well, this idea of accusing her of being dark in their free city, a very common trope we know about, where the way that people who are oppressive and do things wrong, the way they work is they take what they're doing and accuse you of it. Yeah. Okay. When they do something, they say you're doing it. So, they're being dark in your free city. So they say you're being dark in my free city. Okay. And misuse freedom. So we've got that whole idea, the appearance of these other people, but it's resolved in positiveness. Even though in this imaginary idea, when she's dancing through the city of the walls, even when her city is so frightened it hides behind her, and her shadow falls, a symbol of darkness and whatever, she points out that the only way you can get a shadow is if there's sunlight. A shadow is evidence of sunlight. This positivity that's going to come around again. So this last stanza here, again, comes the sense not only of the power of it, but particularly the sense that the positivity wins out in the end. There's no way of destroying it. Okay, quick moves through an awful lot of these. I mean, if your revision's going well, you'll be able to move as quickly between them as possible. If you're still a bit behind on these, you'll be going, oh, hang on, which one's that again? This shows you how well you want to know it. Let's just finish off with Kamikaze. Apologies to those who study Kamikaze with me, because I'm just going to say it again, the thing that I have hammered into you every time I've talked about Kamikaze. So Kamikaze, my favorite question when I'm revising Kamikaze with people is to say, so what happened to the pilot? Why did he turn around and come back? And they'll all say, oh, well, he saw this and he did that, whatever people do. No. The answer is, who knows what happened to the pilot? We have no idea, because this poem is not about what happened to the pilot. It's not about the pilot. It's about, as you can see here, his daughter. It's about his daughter telling a story. Maybe this happened to him. It almost certainly didn't. She wouldn't know. She wouldn't know, because as we know at the end, he never spoke to anybody again. No one ever spoke to him. So no one knows what happened. No one knows why he came back. And this gives it away. She thought, she doesn't know, she's making up. It's imagination. He must have done this. That's what you say when you think, well, surely that's what happened. Okay? She thought he must have done this. Right at the heart of it, the fact that this is about a story told by a daughter to her children to explain what happened to their father. Okay? Now, let's be honest. What do you think really happened to him? My guess is, well, nothing really, because of course it's a made-up story. But if within the story, the reality probably is that he went across and then halfway he got scared and came back, because that's probably what would happen to anybody who turned back, isn't it? Hang on, I'm on my way to crash a plane and end my life. Absolutely, definitely. Maybe I don't fancy doing that. But that doesn't sound so good. That's a problem with your honor. That's the problem at the end that comes in, that means he's ignored. So what does she come up with? Well, what would you want to come up with as a daughter talking about your father? Why would you want him to come back? Because of family. You'd want him to come back because he thought of family. And that's what comes in here. Now, I'm not going into the lovely, beautiful vision of idealized picture that goes around. I'm sure you've looked at that in ad nauseam. But these two stanzas, the fourth and the fifth stanza that come along, these are the heart of it. Again, notice it comes back to memory, although an imagined memory. She's imagining he had this memory. She can't even know if this is a real memory that existed, let alone whether he thought it. But she has him remembering about his brothers waiting and playing a game of building up these cairns of pebbles, saying, right, okay, which one of us can build one that lasts the longest? That kind of competitive brother thing that if you're brothers, you'll know. Yeah. And they're doing this and playing that competitive game as it goes along. Why? Because they're waiting for their father to come home. They're waiting for their father to come home safe. So he goes down, remembers a time of waiting for his father to come home safe, and goes, oh, so I am the father, should go home safe to my children. That's, I think, the suggestion. But what about the detail in here? Right. Going beyond there. These are cairns of pearl grey pebbles. If you know anything about these, cairns were originally things that were built on graves, back pre-gravestones to mark where graves were. So cairns are symbols of death. That's not why they're doing it, but they are symbols of death. And Garland places them in his story next to cairns. Let's see whose cairn lasts longest. So death and survival. Death and survival placed next to each other in the memory of a man who's on his way to certain death and chooses to turn around and survive. Death and survival so close to each other. Then, straight afterwards, I talked about bringing their father home safe. Why would there be a problem? Because the waves are aggressive. A turbulent inrush of breakers. So what have we got again? We've got danger placed next to safety. Again, reflecting his situation. She's creating this idea, this memory in her head that suggests that he has this memory of family, of the importance of the father coming home safe. And it comes at a point where she's thinking about survival and death. She's thinking about danger and safety. They're thinking about the balance between the two of them. You can see how this would take things further with Kamikaze than just, let's face it, if Kamikaze does come up as a primary, and I'm marking it again this summer, I will have hundreds of people just talking about the pilot. It's fine. They'll get marks for it. But when I see people writing about this, it's going to stand out beyond, isn't it? And to be honest, the last thing about Kamikaze here, spend a few minutes with this. For a majority of people, I think you can just ignore this section here. I'd go as far as to say that with the exception of tissue, which doesn't make sense, this is probably the part I am most unsure about in the whole anthology as to any kind of interpretation myself. Why does he list a bunch of fish? Right? Why does he list the fish that his dad's going to bring home? There's nothing following it afterwards. He doesn't list the fish. Thank you, sir. No problem. He doesn't list the fish and then make a comment about them. He literally just says they're waiting for their father to come home safe with, and then he lists a bunch of things that they're coming in. Why? Why? And particularly when you're talking about the tuna as the dark prince, muscular and dangerous. You know, what can we do? All we can do is break it down. What have we got? We've got, and I am not an expert on fish, so please, there are people in here who know a lot more than me about them. Mackerel. Common? Quite common. Yeah. Crabs. Quite common. Crustaceans, different type of thing. Prawns. Much lighter crustaceans, much less aggressive. So again, different kind of crustacean. Whitebait, tiny. Whitebait, really small. Rather than where? Tuna, massive, massive. Don't know if you know about this. It's always one of those moments when you first find out about it, because you think of tuna being in tins and whatever like that. So you just assume tuna are going to be like about that size, and there's lots of them. But if you didn't know, tuna are massive. I mean, huge fish like that. So is that what it is? The variety of things he brings in? Well, what about the description? What about the adjectives? Cloud marked. Kind of a mixture, white and black mixed between them. Black, feathery, silver, dark, loose, muscular. Again, variety. Is this what we're going towards? Things that are gentle, things that are sinister, things that are bright, things that are dark, things that are dangerous, things that are not. Is it as simple as that? Is it that he comes home with all things, all life, good and bad? Is some point being made about the variety of life that we have here? Maybe. That's all that I think you can do, is pull that out. And then once he brought home a dark, muscular tuna, well, there's lots of things you could say about the time that he brought home a dark, muscular prince. But let's leave it there. One more, I think, next week, isn't it? When I'm just going to do some final tips about things to include, things to write, things not to. Okay? Maybe see you then.